So anyway, yeah, so the forecast for 2025 is for an above normal hurricane season, not as active as we were forecasting last year at this time, though. A total of 17 named storms. Of those 17, 9 becoming hurricanes. Of those 9, 4 becoming major category 3, 4, 5 hurricanes. Why we kind of separate out the majors is because even though they only make up about a quarter or 20 to 25% of all the storms in any year, they do about 80 to 85% of the damage. We also forecast accumulated cyclone energy. That's an integrated hurricane wind energy metric that accounts for storm, basically longevity and intensity. If you're a baseball fan, it's kind of like the OPS of hurricanes. I'll be sure to throw in a few baseball references throughout this talk. My mentor, Dr. Bill Gray, who some of you had who some of you may have met a few times, was a huge baseball fan. I'll mention Dr. Gray quite a bit throughout this presentation as well. A new metric we started forecasting a couple of years ago is the accumulated cyclone energy in the western half of the Atlantic Basin. Why we focus on that separately from the basin is because that's where people live, that's where property is, and obviously then you're getting more closely tied to impacts, which is what, if you were here yesterday and you heard Ryan talk, what he was focusing on some with his presentation yesterday. So when it comes to seasonal forecasting, though, a lot of people say this is how we do it. And actually, this cartoon, which was 2007, is perfect. See, verily, we see 17 named storms. So this is Dr. Gray, again, my mentor. That's not how we do these seasonal forecasting. I do tell I've told people that, my mom, when I was born, said, hey, look, this guy's going to be a meteorologist. He's going to be a forecaster, so we're going to name him Phil after the groundhog. That's not how we do our seasonal forecasts. We use a lot of weather and climate data and historical information to come up with these forecasts. We also now use a lot of model forecast data that today Dr. Gray wouldn't have had available to him when he started doing these forecasts back in the early 1980s. So this can be summarized in a couple of quotes from the legendary Yogi Berra. First of all, it is tough to make predictions, especially about the future. I think a few people have said that, and Ryan said, attributed it to Niels Bohr. Forecasting the future is hard, right? Whether you're forecasting weather, whether you're forecasting sporting events, political races, all that stuff, it's hard. But we also find that you can see a lot by looking. Basically, by going back into the past, there are clues in the atmosphere-ocean system that can tip us off as to whether the current hurricane season is going to have above or below normal activity. There are these precursor signals. I'm going to try to convince you of that in this next plot. And here what we're looking at is June and July, so basically right prior to when the season really ramps up. In busy seasons minus quiet seasons. And this was the way Dr. Gray used to always say, if there's any signal, you basically take the top 10, difference the bottom 10, and if there's no signal, then basically it's just not really predictable. But there are kind of coherent spatial patterns in these sea surface temperatures. So in busier seasons, we tend to have a warmer tropical Atlantic. Makes sense, its hurricanes live off of that warm ocean water. If we look in the tropical Pacific, we see cold water in the eastern and central part of the Pacific, warm water in the western Pacific. That's kind of your canonical La Nina-like pattern. And so Dr. Gray, when he was starting doing this research on seasonal hurricane prediction, he was teaching a tropical meteorology class, and this is long before the day and age of Wikipedia. This is back in the good old Encyclopedia Britannica days, but he knew which years were busy hurricane seasons. He knew which years had El Nino conditions, and he said, hey, when we have El Nino conditions in the eastern and central tropical Pacific, we tend to get fewer hurricanes in the Atlantic. And so the question then became, well, why would something going on in the Pacific Ocean impact hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean thousands of miles away? So obviously, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with El Nino and La Nina. El Nino is warmer than normal water in the eastern and central tropical Pacific. La Nina basically colder than normal water in that same region. And why that matters is because of what it does to the thunderstorm activity across the Pacific Ocean. So in a La Nina, or kind of the average pattern, is that you get your strongest thunderstorms near Indonesia, where the waters in the Pacific Ocean are the warmest. In an El Nino, those water temperatures get warm farther to the east, so those thunderstorms shift farther east. And what you end up with is a change in basically the tropical circulation. So Dr. Gray used to always talk about this in, up, and out circulation in thunderstorm activity. So when you have deep convection, you have low-level winds converging into those thunderstorms. You get air going up in the thunderstorms, those towering cumulonimbus, and then high up you get upper-level divergence. So if we think about in an El Nino, you tend to get lower-level easterly wind anomalies, upper-level westerly wind anomalies. And if we think about the prevailing winds that we have in the Atlantic, Typically, those are your trades at low levels. Your upper levels are out of the west. So an El Nino tends to increase those levels of vertical wind shear. Vertical wind shear, good for us, bad for the hurricane. La Nina, basically the opposite effect. You tend to have much reduced lower levels of vertical wind shear, and overall tends to be more active hurricane.